While I've been scripting and recording this, I've had a fairly nasty cold, so if you think I've sounded a little off, well done. You're better at picking up sick people's audio than I am, because I'm never able to notice anything when a YouTuber says that. This is the next part of my coverage of the vanilla characters of SRB2. If you want to see the video where I go through Vanilla Sonic, here's a card for you to go watch it. For anyone else, let's just get straight into it. In much the same way that it's extremely obvious what Vanilla Sonic's game plan was from merely knowing how he plays in everything else ever made, it's also extremely obvious what Vanilla Tails' strategy is. Whereas Sonic is all about incredible speed at the cost of basically being forced to stay grounded, Tails is basically the opposite. He lacks many ways to gain lots of speed, but there's essentially nowhere he cannot reach with his ability to fly. He's probably even more familiar to new players to SRB2 than Sonic was, because while he did have a new ability in the Thock that opens up new gameplay strategies, Tails is functionally identical to previous iterations, with the fly acting and controlling as it always does, just in 3D. You mash the spin button to keep going and you get about 10 to 15 seconds of flight before you run out of stamina and glide back down to the ground. You'll still use it, as you always do, to reach high places, skip platforming or correct missed jumps, and the only changes to its use cases will be down to the increased opportunities to use it in 3D. Classic Sonic games are effectively a series of corridors that occasionally open up into larger rooms, which limit how often Tails' flight can really be used to much effect, but with SRB2's more open level design due to it being 3D, there are many more nooks, crannies and ledges for Tails to aim for. Along with the fact that you need to collect character emblems only he can reach, these increased opportunities to use the fly means that Tails is actually more than just an easy mode in SRB2 like he usually is, as while he can't go as fast on the default path as the majority of the rest of the cast, the way a 3D level is built means he can actually skip notable amounts of a level, unlike in a 2D game where he would be blocked by walls or ceilings. Now, Tails' flight does have a few drawbacks or problems, although how major they are will really depend on personal opinion. Firstly, as previously stated, fly is performed by mashing the jump button, and I know that some people prefer for it to be performed by just holding jump instead, which is why there are a lot of Tails' clone mods that change it to be operated like that. Personally, I do prefer it this way. In concept, I thought I liked the hold control scheme more, but having played some of those mods, I think you get more control by performing it like this, as you don't need to account for your continued upwards momentum after letting go of jump. What you do need to think about is your downwards momentum, as the fly is not an instant reprieve against gravity. If you're falling, you need enough height to first slow down before you begin to pull up, and if you reach terminal velocity, I don't think there's actually any level where you can reach that height. This is a weakness and not an actual flaw, as SRB2 is very much momentum focused, so it'd be bizarre if it didn't come into play here. This is a section to talk about both the character's weaknesses in a gameplay sense and from a more meta standpoint though, so it still warrants a mention. In fact, I'd say the only thing I feel is a genuine flaw here is that Tails lacks a way to get out of his fly quickly. His character description claims you can use spin to descend more quickly, but it's lying. I've tried both tapping and holding spin, and its effect is somewhere between negligible and non-existent. I'm more thinking about a way to cancel the fly once it has begun, because I think it would allow for a greater degree of player freedom without actually affecting character balance. When you think about it, all it would do is allow you to perform movements more quickly, not allow you to perform things you can't already do, especially if you make it so you couldn't fly again between cancelling and hitting a solid object. Tails' only grounded ability is the same one as Sonic's, the spin dash. Indeed, it's functionally identical to theirs. I admit I haven't gone and compared the two pixel by pixel, but they appear to charge as quickly, last as long, take away as much control, etc. The only difference then is how it fits in with the rest of their moveset, and you could argue it's more or less useful to Tails than it is to Sonic. With no other ability designed for him to gain speed quickly like the Thock, Tails relies on this to gain much serious speed, especially when comboed with flight. At the same time, you could argue that makes sense because Sonic is speed based while Tails isn't, and so it doesn't matter how quickly he can move. You can also roll down slopes much the same as both characters, and again, it's functionally identical between both characters. I can't really think what else you might give Tails on the ground anyway. Maybe he could have a projectile, or it could spin his tails like some sort of insta-shield. That's starting to hew away from the original classic Sonic games though, so it's understandable that they didn't implement anything else, and I wouldn't really expect them to do so in any future releases either. I think Tails has a better set of sprites than vanilla Sonic does, and that mostly comes down to a better colour scheme. Sonic and SRB2 always felt a little off in terms of colouring and shading to me, and I think Tails is a little better and somewhat closer to what I think of when I think about the archetypal Tails colour scheme. He's definitely orange, and not the nasty desaturated yellow or overly brown he sometimes can be, but it isn't overly luminous either. I think some of his animations can be a little stiff though, or I don't think that's because they're any more so than any other SRB2 based roster character. I think it's because his tails are always animating even when the rest of his body isn't, which can make them look like two completely separate sprites effectively glued together. I'm fully aware that is probably exactly how these animations actually do work, by the way, but it makes it look like they're done by two different sprite artists, especially the top speed running world they form into, which seems to be shaded in a completely different style to the rest of the body. That being said, I do think the tails are well animated, with some nice blur and weight behind them. I just think they look odd attached to a body that oftentimes is moving so comparatively little. Overall, I think Vanilla Tails is a good character. He's perhaps even more simplistic than Vanilla Sonic, as his primary ability can't really be used for such a versatile range of things as the Thock, but he's very well executed nonetheless. I also think his sprites are pretty good, even if there are some issues with them here or there with how they animate in relation to one another. That being said, I find he lacks the pizzazz I need to feel from something for it to make it to the upper echelons of my ranking scores, and he doesn't have the excuse of being the most default character possible to excuse that like Sonic did. With that in mind, I think he can manage a 6. That might seem harsh, because it is. Maybe if he had some brand new ability that wasn't functionally identical to one from the classic games, he could stand out a bit more amongst Tails' playable appearances, but for now, I have to say he's good, but lacks that certain something he needs to be ranked higher. But I hope you enjoy the video, and ciao.